Welcome to our Living Stones podcast, where we gather to discuss all matters of faith and life as members of God's household. In a world that often leaves us feeling fragmented and disconnected, our hope is that Living Stones will help to further connect us as we pursue the Lord together. I'm your host, Siyoung, and in today's podcast, we'll be discussing the topic of socialism and communism, whether they are compatible with the Christian faith. And joining me today are pastors Paul and Jacob. Welcome back, brothers. Season 3, kicking it off.
Glad to be part of this
All right.
community.
Hey, where's the energy? Where's the energy, guys?
It's a Sunday
Come on.
afternoon, so we're all tired, but we're going to try to do this well, right? Like you said, kicking off season 3, so
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do
Looking
it.
forward to how God will use it. It's been encouraging to hear from so many members and also newcomers always mentioning how helpful our past episodes have been. So, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let's remain faithful to this ministry, guys.
Yes, sir. Let's do it. So, to kick off today's discussion, I want to ask you guys, why are we discussing this topic today in the first place? Why are we even considering the topic of socialism and communism as a relevant topic for us in our context today?
Because I said we should.
There we go. Reason number one.
I think we're probably a little late in tackling this subject matter, but it's become clear to me that over the past decade or so, the popularity of these ideas, so whether it's socialism or communism or whatever else you want to call it, I think the term nowadays is used democratic socialism, and so there are different variations of one essential idea, but it's become more popular, and especially among the younger generations. And so I think it's worth discussing. When I was in my 20s, at least some segments of the church were very clear that communism, especially, is not compatible with the Christian faith, right? But I think that message it really is not shared in our day, at least with the same clarity.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have no problem echoing that sentiment. Of course, there are different shades of socialism, and so it depends on what you're talking about specifically. So I think there is a need to define the terms if we're using any specific term, but so I think the purpose of the podcast or this episode is meant to inform our members primarily, especially our younger ones who may not have experienced any of the tension of the Cold War or who have not heard the horror stories of the previous generations, those who have had to witness the North Korean abuses of that regime. And so, I think we're just living a different time, and the perspective is very different for sure.
Yeah, and I think this topic was also brought about in part because we were anticipating Mamdani, Zohran Mamdani of New York. I think this is when we kind of talked about, this is getting popular, right? Because he is a prominent candidate who got elected and has started, but his platform was actually democratic socialism. And so we're really seeing it at the forefront of our culture today. The mayor of New York, right? New York City. And so not only Mamdani, but AOC and Bernie Sanders, prominent democratic socialists, and they've gained quite a following. They've become popular. And so I think given their rise, it signifies that there is a movement, right? There is a growing movement, and democratic socialism, at least in our country, is gaining traction and popularity, especially amongst the young people, because I think demographic-wise, the people who voted were on the younger side for sure. And so I think that's what makes it relevant for us today, and as Pastor Paul shared.
By the way, I do sympathize with why they would feel like they need something other than our current system.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why there has been a huge shift in thinking, and it's
sure.
because the current system we're living in is I would say, pretty dysfunctional. Right? It's not delivering for the younger demographic, whether it's the increase of college tuition, let's say, or
Right.
housing. I mean, housing prices are like off the charts, and who can afford housing, right? And
Healthcare.
so there's healthcare problems as well. So there's a lot of brokenness in our current, well, I guess, more capitalistic society, and so they become greatly jaded, right? And they're looking for solutions, and the next best thing, I guess, in their minds is like a Bernie Sanders or a AOC or a Mamdani who's well spoken, but I guess again, in our opinion, very dangerous. So I get it. I just don't agree. I think the solution they're seeking after is actually going to make things worse, not better. Right?
Yeah, the language is attractive. Equality, liberty, fairness, or things that are given to you, provided for you. So it's very attractive to a generation that is filled with a lot of anxiety and worry.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's a good way of framing perhaps why younger people are flocking to this philosophy. And so it would help us to define at this point what exactly is socialism. What are we talking about? And in tandem, what is communism, right? And I think it'd be helpful to maybe not only define but compare and contrast the two just a little bit. And so, let's begin with what is socialism. How can we define socialism?
Well, I'm sure PJ did most of the research here, so I'm going to defer to him.
Well, from what I understand, it's simple social ownership, whereas communism is the full-on government, basically running as a single party, determining what people need, what they consider to be fair. But yeah, in socialism, it's just the group of people having their social decisions of making and controlling products, not necessarily run as it's more of the principles of how to run something.
Yeah, I have it here. I think this encapsulates socialism and really at its ultimate communism, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. So everyone contributes in some way to society, their skills, right, and things that they have to offer, and in turn they will receive everything that they need to live, right? And so it's everyone contributes and everyone receive what they need equitably and fairly across the board, right? So it's not that some will prosper a lot more than the other person, but you will receive what you would need. All you need to do is contribute to this collectivist kind of society. And so in addition to what you're saying, I think it is like a political and economic philosophy at the end of the day that emphasizes the collective, right? The collective ownership of skills and talents and resources, and it will be distributed as equally amongst all of the members of that society.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great in theory, but it's been implemented, or people have sought to implement it throughout history, and it's been a huge mess, and it's actually created more poverty than ever, and more death in fact. And I think one thing that I was reminded of is many years ago when I was a high school kid, and this was in church. Actually, I was attending a church in Korea, and you had some college students who were talking about some politics and government, and they were actually sharing from the book of Acts. And I'm sure you know the connection already, but Acts chapter 2, where it says all the believers were together, had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need, and he was in his own way connecting this to the idea of communism and saying, "Oh, look how beautiful this is! It looks so attractive." And so there was a discussion on that. And as a high school kid, I didn't really know all that much about government structure or economic theory, but it did grabbed my attention, and later, maybe we'll touch upon it later as well in our discussion, but it became clear to me that it might sound similar, but in the Bible, giving was never coerced, right? When you're talking about communism, socialism, we're talking about government ownership, right? And they're really, if you take it to an extreme, there is no private property, and so giving is never done out of generosity. It's forced, right? So it's actually anti-Christian. It's anti-biblical. Right? You can't like it's impossible to actually practice generosity within a pure, communistic society because you don't even own anything, right? And so there is, I think, a huge difference there. Something that I think if you're not paying attention, you won't recognize. Right?
Mm. Yeah, and I would add that the difference also, if you're a true kind of socialist, I think socialism, as I understand it, is a means to communism. Communism being kind of like this end goal state where everything is owned by one singular entity and distributed equally amongst everybody, right? And so you keep noticing this theme. It's equity for all, and I think that has the end goal of it, to make sure that not one person is lacking, that there aren't have-its and have-nots, but everyone has it, and that will be accomplished, through means of some people would go to the side of revolution, but I think democratic socialists would perhaps appeal to reform, political reform, as a means to get to that place where everyone gets equal access and essentially like equal outcome of a lot of things. And so I think for me, right, like I think about that, and it's not just economics. I think the cultural kind of shift and tone right now, it's based on race and gender, and it's so that no matter what you are, right, if you have like a certain disadvantage, you got to dismantle that which is causing that inequity, and so it's a structural thing at the end of the day. I think
and inevitably you have to penalize those who are more productive.
Yeah.
Right. You're penalizing productivity, so you're taking away from folks who have more, and you're giving it to those who have produced less. And so in the end, like in New York, for instance, people who have been producing more, therefore, are going to leave to live in a different state, right? Because they don't want to be unfairly targeted, right? And so in the end, like I said earlier, it's going to make people less affluent, right? Not more. It's going to make people more, impoverished in the end. And also, within that system, there has to be an authority, like an ultimate authority, who gets to decide, who has more, who has less, right? Who gets targeted, what the threshold is, who has too much, right? And so the state has to act like a god, right? And so that is, I think, the biggest problem with a socialistic mindset, communistic ideal, is that it's essentially a religion, right? And I think that is the foundation of it. It replaces God with the government, and so all the control is given to a government. And we saw a glimpse of that during COVID, where, oh my goodness, we never imagined that the U.S. government would act with so much, abuse and control, with so much control and power, but it did. And some people were applauding that. They actually welcomed that idea. But to us, it felt like a violation, a gross violation of what the government should be and how it should function. And so that to me is a greater concern. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and kind of that brings me to the question of how did this come about? Are you guys familiar with any parts of like the history of how socialism and communism came to be, was formulated as a philosophy?
Well, all of this is Karl Marx is the central figure of socialism and communism, and he mid 19th century, 1840s, is when he proposed this big idea, and envisioned a world where there would be no class, because what he saw in his observation of history was often the problems that we see in history is because the rich were always oppressing the poor. And so he wanted to, he realized in his mind, in order for us to have a utopian society, there cannot be any class of individuals. And the practice of that is, of course, trying to elevate the poor and bring down the rich by taking away what the rich possesses and giving it to the poor. And so it's his vision of thinking that, okay, in order for human beings to really be a genuine community and society where everyone has everything that we need, we cannot have any classes. I think it really does go back to Marx's view of scripture and the way that he misread passages like Acts chapter 2. Right? He, in his early writings, saw Jesus as, I mean, he didn't really use these words, but basically the first communist, and how the church were constantly giving to people who are in need. And he felt that having some, dabbled in Christianity in his earlier years, really felt that's the best way for human beings to flourish.
Yeah, and my understanding, because I did some research into Marx when I was in seminary. My understanding is that he actually eventually abandoned the Christian faith altogether. My reading of him was he actually became enamored with Charles Darwin and the evolutionary theory, and actually ended up embracing materialism, that this world is all there is, right? And so to gain the most of it is our end goal. And couple that with the time period he was living in is during the Industrial Revolution, and so there are a lot of factory owners who, factory owners and factory workers, and I think he labeled them like the proletariat and bourgeoisie, and he saw the inequity between them, how they're putting in so much work, the factory workers, and yet the factory owners are the ones who are making all the profit, and so he's like, there's something gravely wrong with this, and so the Communist Manifesto, hence all of those writings, it really at the end of the day pushed for like a revolution against the owners, right, the habits, basically as a means to equalize the unequal distribution. But his end goal, like you said, is this classless society, like where there is no more haves and have-nots. At some point, as you keep going back and forth between the haves and the have-nots, you'll eventually come to a point where everything is just like equalized once and for all.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah, that's his dream. But the irony is, as Pastor Paul earlier mentioned, when you try to create a equal society, you still have very much the government having everything, and those who are on the highest level of power still seems to have a lot more than everyone else in society, and they get to then decide who still gets to have a little more than other people, and it would be those who are most allied and loyal to the governing party. And so even though the principle and the vision was to see a classless society, even in that when it's actually done in practice, you can't get away from people wanting more than others, having more power, having more influence, having more wealth than others. And by determining how to distribute, what we have seen in history is that these nations tend to be the most impoverished, most hungry, famine-based nations, and close to having more revolutions, more violent revolutions than the countries that are not fully adapting to the socialist ideas.
Yeah, in some ways, I really think that was his vision of heaven, right? Like his vision of quote unquote heaven is that's like the end times that he wants to live in, is there is no more unequal distribution. Everybody is happy. Everybody has what they need. There's no more somebody has more than the other person. But to get there is going to be this back and forth struggle. It's like you have to dismantle the structures that are preventing the have-nots from having, right? And so we see that even in our day and like day and age now. I think it's like we have to dismantle the structures that are preventing the people who are perceived as not as they don't have as much, whether that's people in poverty, or even we extend that to race, we extend to gender, sexual identity. They're the oppressed class.
Yeah.
And the oppressors are perpetually it's a power struggle at the end of the day. They always have the power and the people who doesn't have as much, right, underprivileged, so to speak, are the ones who are struggling for power. And so there must always be this back and forth thing of like oppressor oppressing, and then the oppressed coming, revolutionizing, and kind of like breaking down, dismantling the structures, and until they get to this somehow utopian place. And so I just think, like, for one, the end goal is really not only is the foundation godless because his goal was materialism, right? To everyone to have perfect amount of riches. And it's essentially the world and life is viewed strictly from a power perspective, which lacks concepts like mercy, grace, forgiveness. But its end, not only is its foundations godless, but its end goal is also godless because it's about material wealth, material riches, prosperity for all, right? And so I think even the foundations are pretty rotten because it's detached from God. And so I think therein lies even the problems of how it was conceived, and we can sympathize with the struggles and the problems that led Marx and people like him to theorize such a thing. But like we said in the before, the solution is worse than perhaps the problem itself. And so that brings me to the question of, I know we kind of went through a couple topics just now, but critiquing socialism and communism. I know, Pastor Paul, you touched upon it just a little bit. But how is socialism and communism incompatible with the Christian faith? Because that's what you kind of already laid out. Can you kind of expound?
While Pete is thinking about that question, let me throw out a couple of quotes here, because I was so close to becoming a minor in economics, believe it or not. So I always had some interest in the subject matter, but. You all know Margaret Thatcher, right? Also Milton Friedman. These come from them. Margaret Thatcher once said, "The problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money." And then Milton Friedman quote, "A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both." And I'll save some other quotes for later. But yeah, PJ, go ahead. You could first respond to that. The problems with
socialism.
Why is it incompatible with Christianity?
Yeah.
Or in what ways, right?
Well, aside from really being its own religion, right? You got the rewards and the punishment based on not what God has to say, but based on what the state determines. So it is usurping, trying to replace God. And that's why you see in most of these communist societies, one of the things that you see that's banned is corporate worship, and religion is outlawed. The state is the religion. So the Chinese government, and even now, even though people do argue whether it's a full-on communist regime, we see Christianity is still very much a threatening religion to the government. And you can apply this to, I think, virtually every communist nation today, where Christianity especially is a very dangerous religion to the regime, because it talks of human free will. It talks of every single human being made in the image of God. It talks about, even Scripture talking of how, we are to be rewarded for the good things that we put. If you work with your hands, those who don't work at all shouldn't be fed, shouldn't have food to eat, because there's an expectation for human beings to labor and providing care. It's their principles of confiscating from those who have it in order to give it to those who don't, which even goes against the very commandments that we see in Scripture, where even when you look at the Ten Commandments, it seems like God had this plan of human societies where human beings will properly own their own things. It's your house, it's your wife, it's your servant, right? Your animals, and we have the freedom to freely share and use out of the love that we have for one another, rather than a state telling us what we have to do with the possessions that we have. Ultimately, the biggest problem is it's replacing our ultimate authority, God Himself, with fellow human beings who are also fallen, and having them dictate on how we're supposed to live.
It also portrays inequality, right, to be essentially evil. Like it's wrong, but that's not the Bible's teaching either, right? The Bible assumes that people, they receive different degrees of talent, right? Life is not completely fair in that regard, right? We're given different IQs, right? Not everyone's equally gifted athletically, right? Not everyone is born into a healthy family. We have advantages and disadvantages of every kind, and those things are not to be considered, necessarily evil or wrong. And God never promises that in this life that we should expect everything to become equalized, right? That's not our Christian calling. We're not to pursue that, right? But we're simply pursued to be faithful in what we've been given, and to not envy, which is a big thing. Do not envy what others have, and be grateful what you've been given. And so, if you think about all these things, and I like what PJ said about private property, the Bible assumes that we're given private ownership, and out of that we practice generosity. I think that's a key component as well. And so, yeah, a lot of things just they don't match up at all. And I think again, it's because it is its own religion in the sense it defines what justice is, what fairness is, what equality is, and so it's not compatible.
Yeah, and I would add also that it undermines the power of sin. Right? You assume that you just get a couple of like-minded people who agree upon the principles of socialism or communism, and they surely would distribute freely amongst all without being greedy for themselves. And yet you look at the nations that, North Korea, look at the Kim family, right? Through generations, they've starved people to death while, that they themselves are well-fed.
Yeah.
And he and his cronies, right, are doing well for themselves.
But they're doing it for the greater good, they would argue, right?
Right.
It's a Thanos mentality, right? I'm doing this for the greater good.
But is it a truly equitable society when people are literally starving to death, right? And I
guess that's why I'm saying they have to define or redefine what equality or equity is.
Yeah.
And it's based on their own judgment, and there has to be some authority in the end. And so
but that authority is always going to be man in that context, and man, as we know, we're fallen people. We're greedy. We're prideful, and all of these things. And so, I think it assumes too much about man, right? Assumes too much good in man.
Yeah,
and it makes sense given the kind of like the godless kind of foundations of it. It's like you assume, surely if you dismantle all the structures, man, when we're all on equal playing field, we'll give to each other everything that we need. But life doesn't work like that, right? I think Bible portrays a pretty dark nature of man apart from Christ, and so this utopia that it's seeking, it's an impossibility on this side of heaven.
So young people, they love to point out the corporate greed that they see in this fallen world, and surely there is a lot of corporate greed, whether you're looking at big tech or just companies that really don't care about their employees. So you have a lot of jaded young workers, right? We know, we've seen it, but they don't realize that greed is just not, it's not limited to capitalism, right? You can if you don't have a greedy corporation or corporations, then what you'll have is you'll have extremely greedy and super powerful government elites that control everything, and so capitalism does not have a monopoly on greed. Right? It's a human condition thing, right? So no matter what system you implement, you're going to have some brokenness that is just part of the system, given that we live in a fallen world. Right?
Yeah, that's why capitalism tends to work better than socialism, because capitalism assumes that everyone is selfish and greedy, that we're all out for ourselves, and understanding that since no human being can survive in isolation, we all need to work and live together. There's a sense we will reward you for the good things that you produce, right? In that people will give you the money that you need, that you can trade for other good things.
Yeah, that's the profit component, right?
Yeah.
So the profit it serves as like a mechanism to sort of balance things out, right?
Yeah.
But I want to make it clear that profit does not equal greed, right? That's not one to one.
Yes, that's a good point.
So go ahead. I think go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just assuming that no human being is just gonna go and give their things away. No human being is gonna go and act on goodness just for the sake of goodness. But it's assuming that we all are looking and hoping to get something good out of it. So I think that's why it works, because it has a better understanding of our innate nature as sinful human beings. Whereas, as you mentioned with socialism, it's assuming that, I have 3 properties. I'd be happy to give away 2 of them that I've worked all my life to get. And take it, give it to whoever needs it. But that's why socialism and communism is inherently violent, because you have to force things out of people. And often communism has started through revolution and violent revolution, where the poor or certain classes of people would go and raid the wealth of the rich. Even in Russia, peasants who had proper ownership and possessions were also a threat to the communist regime. Even though they are of the lower class, just the fact that you privately own things cannot work with the communist form of government. And so even those who are in the lower class, as long as they own things, were a threat to the government.
No, that's good. To reiterate, right? Another way to say it is that the reason why communism or socialism is more dangerous is because the power is much more concentrated, whereas in capitalism, the power is spread out, right? And so you have various industries where no one is truly monopolizing every single thing. I mean, of course, there's some danger with big tech being so big, but there's a mechanism in which you can kind of spread the power around, right? And so, in one sermon I remember a few years ago, using the movie Avengers. What's the jewel thing that they try to
The stones?
the stones,
Infinity
right?
Stones?
Is it the Infinity Stones?
Infinity-
Infinity Stones, right? The whole effort was to make sure that Infinity Stones were not concentrated, right? That they were spread out. Right? To me, that's a picture of capitalism in a sense. Whereas in the end, Thanos wanted all of them concentrated, which gave him the most power and control, and that's when things became ruinous for everybody. And so I think that's a pretty apt picture of what happens and the difference between these two systems.
So let me ask you guys, just to clarify for our listeners, is capitalism more compatible with the Christian faith than socialism and communism?
It's not in a fallen world. There is no perfect system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But would you say
it is more compatible because it promotes freedom, right? You're given the freedom to be a complete idiot and a complete greedy scoundrel if you wanted to within capitalism, but you also give them the freedom to be the most generous, right, and the most productive citizen, right, that benefits a multitude of people. And so that it is primarily driven by this idea that, hey, no one's controlling you. You're free to produce whatever you want. You're free to live any way you want to, right? But you again, you're given the freedom to sin. You give them the freedom not to sin. But it's really, in the end, it's on you.
Yeah, I think it's more compatible with the creation order. God created this world with, based on His law, and there is a system of retribution, law of reward, punishment based on how you live. And I think capitalism takes those principles where if you're working hard and diligent, yeah, there should be a reward for you for all the work that you've put in. If you do all the bad things, then yeah, there are going to be bad consequences for the things that you do. And again, as we mentioned, is it perfect? Absolutely not. People have found ways to corrupt and abuse the system, but the system itself is set up so that there's a proper level of reward and punishment based on what you're able to produce and give and work on.
Yeah, but the corruption is real, and that's why we said earlier that's why people are jaded. There's a term that's often used, crony capitalism, right? It's like a system where the truly productive are not rewarded, but those who are sort of in bed with the existing powers. And so, if you're, let's say, a bank too big to fail, then the government will reward you, even though you essentially failed your business, they'll still prop you up, right? That's sort of an example of crony capitalism, and it does no real long-term good where for those suffering, and so there is that. There is corruption. I like here another quote for us to think about, right? This is from Winston Churchill, guys.
So many British people you're quoting.
No one pretends that they used to be good people. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, that it had been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. And the same idea can be applied to this discussion we're having with capitalism and socialism, right? No one pretends that capitalism is perfect or all wise, but it is a much better system than the alternative, essentially. Okay, and there is no perfect system because, again, we live in a fallen world. We're Christians. We know that that sin does corrupt everything. As long as there's people involved, there's going to be some measure of corruption that we all have to budget for. But I'm telling you, you don't want all power to be concentrated in one entity, right? And so that's the danger. I mean, imagine a world in which the government essentially controls big tech, as we saw kind of glimmers of that during COVID, how it's, sort of influenced it and try to manipulate information. What if they controlled not just that, but the entire healthcare industry, the automotive industry, what you're to drive and, how long you're to drive and where you can travel and, the airline industry. And imagine, right? I mean, is that the world you want? And so those things are, real questions.
Yeah. So at baseline, capitalism is more compatible with the Christian faith because it promotes the biblical ideas of freedom. And also, I think you guys touched on this, but I would say stewardship, right? So with what you're given, if you're able to multiply, right, that's a good thing. If you're able to be productive and create goods for other people, that's a good thing, right? And without it being controlled or compelled.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast in a purely communistic society. We'd be thrown in jail, right? And the reason why communist dictators don't like the Christian faith because the Christianity is the one who puts government in its place, right? Because we operate under God's rule. He is our king, not the government. And so, of course, that doesn't mesh well at all with Marxist ideology. Right?
Yeah, not to mention, I think capitalistic societies are the most innovative because you are rewarded for the work that you put in.
Yeah.
And you reap what you sow in a sense. And so a lot of the cool technology and all the sort of latest advancements, that are coming from, at least they have their footing in capitalistic societies because it's not stifled or you're not forced to give away what you do. And so you're more motivated, right, to create good for others. Obviously, with the boundaries and parameters, with the fact that people do get greedy and abuse those things. But at a baseline, I think what we're saying is capitalism, though as imperfect as it is more compatible with the Christian faith, given what it espouses. So, given that, how should we respond as Christians as we see the rise of socialism, socialist ideas and ideologies kind of taking root in American society? What are we to do, and how are we to sort of live in light of this? Any practical wisdom, any advice that you would like to give our listeners?
Well, we know that rise of socialism, communism isn't new in America. It has occurred before. The Great Red Fear that happened during the Cold War, where Americans were dabbling with the idea of communism, and there were a lot of conflicts within universities and think tanks of what is right. So it's not the first time we've heard of the rise of communist ideas in America. It's just, I think we need to look back at history and see that every attempt of communism has been tried, or rather, every communist societies, these are trials that we've seen, and we can say that every single one of them have failed. And the second thing is that we should never seek for rescue or salvation in a fellow man, right? Never hope in the government or seek for an ideal utopian world, because even our idea of what a utopian world would look like ultimately ends in chaos. All the movies that we see that promote utopian societies, they're the bad guys, because we understand that whatever aim of utopia we try to create in this world, because of man's fallen nature, will always lead into a chaotic society. So it leads all the more to place our hope not in man, but in our God and our Savior, who will one day come to make all things new. What will all of that look like in our day-to-day in governing? We have some ideas, but not every clear idea. But we know that it will surely be better, because there won't be sin corrupting us. We won't be corrupted by sin anymore. There will be genuine love for the fellow man and the world that God has created. So there is hope that all believers can have. But while we are in this world, and particularly in a representative democracy, we need to be very careful about who we elect. We need to be very certain about the people that we're choosing, but recognizing that whoever we choose or whoever's in the office will never be the perfect solution to the problems in our society.
Yeah, well said. I'm not sure if I can add anything more. Let's see. We also long for a utopia, right? But we also recognize that it's going to come according to God's timing, and not through our own human means or imaginations. God has mapped out our future already, and so we need to trust in His ways, and not live with this so what we would call over realized eschatology, right? And bringing heaven on earth, right, through unjust means. And so I think that's important to recognize. There's another quote that I vaguely remember, could have been by like Reagan or somebody, saying something along the lines of, we shouldn't take our freedom for granted, because it's just one generation away from losing it, essentially, something like that, right? And I think that's true. We need to guard the freedoms that we've been given. If you think about the U.S. and how it's become so prosperous, it's because of the not just the capitalistic engine that was behind it, but really the Judeo-Christian philosophy that served as a foundation for this country, and so much freedom was promoted as a result of that. And I think I was a bit shocked at how quickly we lost a big chunk of that freedom in 2020, 2021, where all of a sudden people started acting like, I don't know, they forgot who they were, and they would just easily give up their personal freedoms really for nothing. And I think just again, we shouldn't take our freedoms for granted. Right? These are God-given, blessings, and once it's taken, then normally it takes a revolution of some kind or a war, right, to win it back. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would also add how we should respond is that the church, I think it's an answer to a lot of the ills in our society, whether it's the cultural erosion, whether it's kind of like the hopelessness that we feel that and we see, the isolation. I think church is where God is doing his work, and he promises a lot more than just a materialistic recovery, a restoration, but it's far more than that, right? I think there's redemption that's promised, and it's redemption from sin, redemption of the world, and it gives us the motivation to be generous and merciful to those who don't have it, right? And so I really think being faithful to the building up the church, being faithful to what God has called us to as members of God's household, to be faithful to serving God's people and showing justice and mercy to those who are in need. I really think in an age where people are so lost and confused and everything's so chaotic, here's the opportunity for us to speak the truth, for us to present a better alternative, really, that God is doing something, right? God is doing something far better than our governments, these people can promise. And so let's be faithful. I would just encourage all our listeners to be faithful in your walks. Let's really seek to grow together as a church and be faithful in the ways that God has called us to. That would be my encouragement, because I think the ultimate hope is found in what God is doing. And so,
You sound like David Moon there. Is the church is the final apologetic? Would you say?
I just think we have to offer something better, and it is indeed, I think, found in the church. And so, yeah, maybe I'm taking on more of this tone, but thank you guys for your insight and your wisdom, and also just encouragement for our listeners. As we come to the end of this episode of Living Stones, we hope that you found our discussion on socialism and communism helpful in navigating through the cultural and political tensions of our country as Christians. If you found value in today's episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Remember that you are not alone in this journey. We are members of God's household, united by a shared faith in the Lord and the desire to grow together. So until next time, may God's grace and peace be with you all. Thank you for being a part of Living Stones.